Truthspresso, Episode 8.
Face it, we all would rather sleep in this morning. That's why God gave us espresso, to kickstart our zombified corpses into hyperdrive. And now, giving your mind and soul the morning shot of truth it craves. This is Truthspresso with Daniel Mynyk.
Hello and welcome to Truthspresso. For this episode, I have a very interesting topic. Now, I'd like to think that every topic in every episode is interesting, but this is going to be one that's a little bit off the beaten path, and it is, I would like to say, for entertainment purposes only. This is not a politically charged topic, so to speak, but it is a social topic, and although I know that it's basically picking one side over another, it is more of a topic of vindication. And this topic for this episode I would like to call 6 Superpowers of Introverts. Now, introversion has gotten a bad rap over the years, and it is now just getting better in the social arena as various psychologists have studied the properties of introversion. Introverts used to be considered a few decades ago basically deficient in social skills, and often introverts were thought of as people who did not develop some of the skills necessary to function in society. Introversion was equated with being shy. Now, that might be the case for some people, but not all introverts are shy. Introversion used to be considered a pathological problem. But now we have discovered through studying the properties of the mind and personality types that being an introvert is just a different type of personality from being an extrovert, and introverts and extroverts have their own properties, their own various pros and cons. And so for this episode, I'd like to talk about 6 superpowers that many introverts might possess that many extroverts might not necessarily possess. So the intention of this episode is to poke the hornet's nest a little bit. This is all in good form, and it is strictly for entertainment purposes, although I would like to say that these points contain elements of truth. I consider myself an introvert, and I would like to vindicate myself in this episode. I would like to say that being an introvert is to my advantage in various ways. But then you might ask yourself the question as a listener to this podcast: why would an introvert want to run a podcast? Isn't that the domain of extroverts? Well, you might be surprised, and to run a podcast like Truthspresso has been my desire for a very long time, and as an introvert, I want to jump into the world of podcasting and use it to sharpen and improve some of my interpersonal skills. So let's look at the definition of introvert versus extrovert. This is not actually a dichotomy. Introvert and extrovert are really ends of a spectrum. They are two sides of a spectrum. There are different levels of introvert and different levels of extrovert. So think of the introvert-extrovert relationship as being like the pH scale. On one end, you have extreme acids, and on the other end you have extreme bases, and then there is a spectrum in which something becomes more or less acidic and more or less basic. So it is a spectrum, it is not a dichotomy. So being an introvert, it is not necessarily a level of being shy. Now, introverts can struggle with shyness, especially in childhood. I would say that I was definitely one of those. I struggled with being able to look at people in the eye, and in social events, I would have a hard time shaking people's hands and looking at people as I talk to them, and I would not have much to say unless there was a topic of interest to me as a child, and I had to force myself to overcome that a little bit. Now, because I have focused on looking at people in the eye, sometimes I have to try not to do that so that I don't make people uncomfortable, thinking that I'm staring at them or something like that. And so, for introverts, there are definitely social challenges, admittedly, because for being an introvert, sometimes certain social situations and certain mannerisms come as a thought-out skill, a thought-out thing that we have to focus on rather than something that is just purely natural. So, introvert versus extrovert is really not about necessarily a level of shyness, but it reflects the source of how we charge our energy. Introverts recharge our energy by being alone, by being away from the crowds, and we charge our energy as if we have a battery pack. Extroverts charge their energy by being around people. And so introverts recharge their batteries by being alone, and extroverts charge by being around people. So if we want to compare introverts and extroverts to, say, electronic devices, now, of course, as an aside, think, who but an introvert is going to think of an analogy like that? But think of, say, a portable device versus one that you have to plug into an electric to an outlet. Think of battery pack for introvert and AC outlet for extrovert. The extrovert, to function, must be plugged into a source of power to which other people are plugged into, and they derive their energy from people, whereas introverts derive their energy by plugging the battery itself into a charger outside of people, and then they use this power that they have charged up in their batteries to do socializing and so on, and then when that battery runs out, they need to go back and recharge it. Now, extroverts might consider that a deficiency for introverts because they have to recharge alone. But I would like to make the point that as an introvert, I see that as an advantage, because as an introvert, I do not have to depend on other people for my source of energy. I can engage in social endeavors as an introvert. I can socialize, and I can even imitate extroverts in certain circumstances. But I don't depend on other people. There is a level of dependence, as I will get to a little bit later. So, without further ado, I'd like to dive into the 6 superpowers of introverts that introverts might not even recognize are superpowers. So, number 1, introverts are good listeners and are observant. As such, introverts will listen and learn before trying to teach. So I got this point from an article from time.com. The article is called "The Surprising Benefits of Being an Introvert." So these points, these 6 superpowers, are not from any one particular article. They are superpowers that I have gathered from various articles. So when reading this article from time.com called "The Surprising Benefits of Being an Introvert," I got this particular point, that introverts are good listeners and are observant. So why is this a superpower? So say an extrovert wants to teach a topic. The extrovert might be opening his or her mouth before thinking deeply, and while they might have a lot to say, an extrovert might be saying things that are kind of irrelevant to the topic. But an introvert, if an introvert is in a teaching situation, the introvert, being a good listener and being observant, might be more inclined to listen and learn and really think through a topic before trying to teach. This is what I would like to call looking before you leap. So an introvert might be someone who is less likely to jump off a cliff because everyone else is doing it. The introvert might be the first to realize that there is a pit down there and not just follow the crowd. And of course, being a Christian, I have plenty of Bible verses that I believe back up these points. So the Bible, I would say, is very friendly to the superpowers of being an introvert. So does the Bible say that being a good listener and being observant is something that we should strive for? Well, yes. Proverbs 25 and verse 11 says, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver." And we have all heard the idea that introverts will think before they speak. And so although an introvert might be quiet for a while, if an introvert wants to speak, it's because the introvert has something important to say. And so this verse might fit an introvert very well. An introvert is likely to have a word fitly spoken. Also, the Apostle James says in James chapter 1 and verse 19, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath." Now think about this. This is something that describes an introvert to a T. An introvert does a lot more listening before an introvert starts to speak. So an introvert would be swift to hear and slow to speak. And so the introvert might be less likely to get riled up in a public situation because the introvert is always thinking things through and listening before jumping in to speak his or her mind and getting all angry because of the slightest little thing that someone else said at the moment. So now, let's compare what James said to an extroverted apostle that we find in the Bible. James and Peter knew each other very well. Impetuous Peter. Peter was definitely an extrovert. And remember, Peter, he would sometimes put his foot in his mouth a little bit. He'd say things like, "I'll never deny you, Jesus." Whoops. He denied Jesus 3 times, Peter was someone who would definitely leap before he looked, and Peter could have stood to learn a little bit from the extroverts. Peter, as an extrovert, could definitely stood to have learned from a little bit from introverts. Remember, this is for entertainment purposes, but I know this is going to chap the hide of some extroverts, but this is the superpowers of introverts. So before you turn off this episode as an extrovert, just listen to some more of these superpowers. So, number one was that introverts are good listeners and observant, and they listen and learn before trying to teach and open their mouth. Number two, introverts are independent. They are self-contained and self-entertaining. Now, I definitely consider this a superpower as an introvert myself. I can do socializing, but I can be independent of people. I can actually function without having to have people around me. I can have situations of being the life of a party as an introvert, but as an introvert, my source of energy is portable. I can charge my battery like a battery pack by being alone and then use that energy in public. The introverts do like to make use of the things that they learn. They have a need to be able to use their skills that they have acquired in the quietness of being alone and use it in society. They do want other people to benefit, and sometimes they really want to speak their mind. But they don't depend on this for their source of energy. They are able to charge their own energy that does not depend on other people. So think about this. Extroverts function like, as I mentioned before, being plugged into having AC power only and being plugged into a surge strip on a wall in which other devices are plugged into. So if you unplug the extrovert from that networked power, the extrovert starts to lose energy. So the extrovert is dependent on an external power source to function. But the introvert can wear a battery pack, and as an introvert learns and grows and improves his or her social skills, an introvert can actually increase that battery pack capacity, or learn, as we say, as with a cell phone, as with a smartphone, the software can be upgraded to use less power over time or conserve power and improve battery life. That is definitely, in my view, an advantage of introverts over extroverts. So let me come up with a very provocative analogy for extroverts compared to introverts. Introverts, you might like this a little bit, where we get a bad rap that we are socially deficient and we need to improve our social skills like the good extroverts. But think of this analogy, and extroverts listen and weep. Remember, this is for entertainment. Don't take this too seriously, but I'm going to say this tongue-in-cheek. I'm going to say this in jest. A good analogy for extroverts are vampires and leeches. Think of a vampire. A vampire derives its food source from sucking the blood out of a victim. And the same with a leech. A leech must have a host and must suck the lifeblood or the energy from a host. So, like vampires, introverts absolutely depend on other people to function. It's like they gotta sink their fangs and suck the blood out of other people. And if they don't do that, they starve. Whereas an introvert is much more independent and can function not only in social environments, but can function alone and can actually recharge their own energy. Think of the symbiotic relationship that an extrovert has as a leech with a host. And basically the leech depends on living on the host and has to take some of the energy, some of what makes the host function, its own blood or its own energy, and feed off of that. An introvert can get exercise by taking long nature walks, which doesn't depend on the presence of other bodies. So introverts can find ways to get exercise without depending on an exercise buddy. Now, of course, an extrovert could argue that exercise buddies can provide accountability partners and can actually increase the productive output of various exercises that introverts might struggle with. I admit this. I propose that if push comes to shove, I just might have to create an episode later on that will vindicate extroverts. Yes, I just might have to do that so we can be a little bit balanced here at Truthspresso. But, as an introvert, I've got to show how the personality type that I am has its advantages that society just might not recognize. So, number 2 was that introverts are dependent. They are self-contained and self-entertaining in ways that extroverts really struggle with being or may not even be able to be. Independence is a good superpower. Number 3, introverts are more likely to be humble than extroverts. And this is something that I got from a website called scienceofpeople.com. And the title of the article was 6 Surprising Benefits of Being an Introvert that you can use every day. 6 surprising benefits of being an introvert you can use every day. According to this article on scienceofpeople.com, an introverted superpower, as they called it, was humility. And of course, the Bible can attest to this, so here are some more supporting verses from the Bible about the superpowers of being an introvert. So if an introvert can be more humble than an extrovert, then I could multiply verses from the Bible talking about humility, but for entertainment, let's look at 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 through 6. Starting in the end of the verse, "For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time." Now, an extrovert who struggles with humility and always has to have attention on him. He has to have the social attention and has to keep one-upping people right on the spur of the moment, always trying to exalt him or herself in public situations. An introvert that's more likely to be humble might realize that God will exalt you in due time. So point number 3, humility, superpower. Superpower number 4, creativity. An introvert who is taking time to be alone and really study and mull over information and notice the fine details that are not related to other people. An introvert is likely to be more creative. An introvert can succeed as an artist, as a scientist. An introvert might be more adaptive to various complex theories, or might be able to learn math much better than an extrovert. Now think about this. How many inventions do extroverts use that really came about from introverts? Extroverts use the inventions of introverts. Think about this. Extroverts might be using Facebook or Instagram or even Google to search for different things, or think of any kind of social media you might like Twitter. All of these were likely coded and developed and designed by very adaptive, very creative, and very thoughtful introverts. Now, of course, extroverts might make some of the most interesting usage of these things, but remember, extroverts use things that are made by introverts. Extroverts depend on introverts even to be extroverted to their full capacity. So who's really dependent on whom here? So, of course, I have another Bible verse to support this superpower of introverts: creative, theory, knowledge, study. Psalm 119 and verse 99, David said, I have more understanding than all my teachers, for thy testimonies are my meditation. Okay, superpower number 5 for introverts, and this is really going to ruffle some feathers, and admittedly introverts and extroverts could either be good or bad in different ways on this one, but I have looked at various articles, and various articles support the notion that number 5, introverts are more likely to be frugal with their money. So, starting off with a supporting Bible verse, Proverbs 17, verse 18, it says, A man void of understanding striketh hands, and becometh surety in the presence of his friend. So basically, someone who is so sociable, who is so quick to jump into things that really link him to other people, make agreements. Striking hands has to do with making contracts and really getting yourself into a certain type of social commitment, and then becoming basically indebted into some kind of quick contract situation without thinking it out. The person void of understanding, the extrovert, come on, just give me a little break here. This is for entertainment purposes, so don't take this too seriously. But if the man of understanding, or the extrovert, is quick to strike hands and make contracts and become a surety in the presence of his friend. So an article that I looked at from wisebread.com talks about how introverts are most likely to be frugal over extroverts. The title of this article from wisebread.com is 6 Smart Money Habits of Introverts. And the point that I got from this article, one of the 6 points that this article presents, is that introverts don't, quote, keep up with the Joneses, unquote. Introverts are less likely to try to keep up with the Joneses. Introverts don't really care as much about fashion trends, large wardrobes, or expensive or glitzy clothes like an extrovert might. Introverts are most likely to focus on substance over symbolism. Introverts prefer accomplishment over aesthetics. Now, of course, there's a spectrum here. There are introverts who are highly aesthetic. There are extroverts who like some good substance. But for the most part, introverts statistically are going to prefer substance over symbolism and accomplishment over aesthetics. I personally can't even begin to understand how the attraction some of you extroverts have for wearing expensive jewelry. It doesn't even click with me. I simply do not understand the attraction of wearing expensive clothes and wanting to get people to look at you in that way. I prefer people to look at me for what I can accomplish and do with my mind and my hands. I don't care to have people look at me for something that is merely symbolism or merely outward appearance. It doesn't even click. I don't understand it at all. Introverts might prefer to shop online rather than go to a store and get into the hustle and bustles of the crowds. Now, you extroverts might think that this is an advantage, but think of this. Think of the advantages of shopping online for a lot of things. Shopping online provides you with more available options at cheaper prices. Think Amazon. How often have you ever seen an item sold in a brick and mortar store that actually was cheaper to get there than from Amazon.com? And now think of introverts who are likely to shop online. They likely don't need instant gratification. Extroverts are likely to shop out of impulse and are likely to buy something because they're going to buy clothes because they want to change into them right away. They're likely to impulsively buy things so they can wear them immediately. They're likely to buy things so they can eat them or use them or whatever immediately. There's an instant gratification, admittedly, that you can get from a brick and mortar store. You bring that item up to the cashier, you buy it, and you have it right away. But introverts statistically are likely don't need that instant gratification. Introverts, if they really want something and see that it's worth it, they are willing to wait a little bit longer and wait for it to be shipped home from Amazon. So, if an introvert realizes that they likely don't need instant gratification for things, they are less likely to need things at all compared to extroverts. Introverts might likely need fewer things than extroverts. They are less likely to spend and buy things that they don't need compared to extroverts. Introverts there's a less likelihood of expensive habits or addictions, like daily Starbucks, daily drinks at bars, which cost more than drinking alcohol at home. And of course, I mentioned that it might, I personally don't drink alcohol. I don't think it's a good idea if you can get addicted to something like that. It's expensive and destructive to your health. And if you can get by without it, I would say get by without it. So introverts are less likely for daily expensive habits like daily Starbucks, daily drinks at bars, daily eating out lunch with coworkers. So do these all sound familiar if you listen to episode 4? Yes, introverts are less likely to struggle with these type of things, especially bars. Drinking at bars, which are more expensive than drinking at home, and especially eating lunch out, because the experience, the socializing with coworkers, but that leads to expensive eating habits where if you brown bag your own lunch and bring it to work, you're going to spend a lot less money. So being an extrovert could be a very expensive lifestyle that doesn't lead to a lot of productive, lasting results. Okay, number 6, final superpower of introverts is that introverts can be more adaptable. So, as I mentioned before, introverts can learn social skills. Introverts can learn and practice good speaking skills. I mean, as an introvert myself, I have definitely improved my public speaking skills by forcing myself out of my introverted comfort zone. I have volunteered for many opportunities to do things in which I am speaking in front of a church, or even volunteered to teach Sunday school. I have taught adult Sunday school quite a few times in different churches. I have given several presentations at work, and some have recognized that I have presented a degree of professionalism in those presentations. I am trying to get into the habit of creating episodes for a podcast, as we now recognize this podcast, Truthspresso, is one of my things that as an introvert, I am trying to bite the bullet and make something entertaining and worthwhile and well thought out, and blabbing into a microphone with no one listening can be extremely awkward. It is definitely a skill to be learned, even for extroverts. And public speaking is not necessarily something that is introvert versus extrovert. There are many introverts who have developed keen public speaking skills. There are some extroverts who, in a crowd, in a social gathering at someone's house, watching sports or playing party games, some extroverts could be very loud and be social butterflies. But those very same extroverts, if you put them in front of a microphone on a stage to speak in front of people and not really be interacting with people, some of those very same extroverts could struggle with stage fright. So there have been situations where I, even as an extrovert who can be sometimes quiet in social gatherings because I have nothing relevant to say to the topics that come up there, I can feel comfortable just going up on stage and speaking my mind and speaking from a very well thought out, prepared presentation with a lot of good information, where some extroverts, you put them up there on the stage and they get nervous and their voice shakes, and they really look like they would be an introvert otherwise, but so their social skills of talking to lots of people might not necessarily prepare them for being public speakers. So in closing, everyone, whether introvert or extrovert, can learn and practice skills to improve himself or herself. So here's some advice for extroverts. Learn to slow down and listen at times. You can avoid embarrassing situations of putting your foot in your mouth. Now, introverts, you're not out of the woods here, too. Introverts, here's some advice for you. Get out of your comfort zone and learn to speak in front of people. Force yourself to take opportunities. Practice public speaking in private, such as when driving to work. Introverts, you have a lot of great ideas from all of the listening and observation that you do of the world around you. So introverts, the world needs to hear your great ideas.
Thank you for waking up with Truthspresso. Good morning, and God bless your day.
Hey friends, Daniel Mynyk here again. If you liked waking up to this episode of Truthspresso, I would really appreciate it if you would rate it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever application you use to listen to Truthspresso.